Okay, good morning. We are in the Gemara now. On your Dalet Amdal, the last lines there, the two dots. Says the Gemara, Amar Abavo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So this is going on the Bein HaPrakim of the Mishnah. Recall, the Mishnah on your Gimel Amud Aleph, the Mishnah told us what are the Bein HaPrakim. The Mishnah said, Elu and Bein HaPrakim. What are the Bein HaPrakim? Ben Brachot Rishon L'Shniya, Ben Shni L'Shma, Ben Shma L'Pahim Shma, Ben Vahim Shma L'Vayomer, Ben Vayomer L'Emes V'Yatzev. Rabbi Yehuda said, Ben Vayomer L'Emes V'Yatzev Lo Yafsek. Between Vayomer and Emes V'Yatzev, one may not be mafsek. The Ritva brings down two opinions. What does it mean that one is not able to be mafsek? Does it mean that one is not able to be mafsek in terms of any hefsek at all, like treat it like zero hefsek, or maybe treat it like the emsa parak? So you could have some hefsek, but only mipnei ayira, that kind of thing. This is the two opinions brought down in the Ritva. But Rabbi Huda is very makbid by emes v'yatzev not to be mafsek. This is the Gemara starting out now on Yadalam. Now two dots says the Gemara Elohim ben Aprak, and this is the ben Aprak. Remember Rabbi Yochanan. Halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Damar ben alakechem lemes v'yatzev lo yasik. That one should not be mafsek between emes, when you say ani Hashem alakechem, and emes, one should not be mafsek. Now, why is it that one shouldn't be mafsek? Right, ani Hashem alakechem and emes are two separate parashas. One is a parasha from Vayemer. One is a thing that the rabbis made up. Emes v'yatziv, very nice, but it's not part of Shema. So why shouldn't you be mafsek between Ani Hashem Lekechem and Emes? So the Amar Avavo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, my time Rabbi Yehuda. Why is Yehuda so makbid not being mafsek between Hashem Lekechem and the word Emes? Let's turn the page. Because it says in pasuk V'Hashem Elokim Emes. Because you have a pasuk in Yirmiyah. Pasuk in Yirmiyah says that Hashem is the God of truth. Now, and it just happens to be that in Tav Shem Pei on Shabbos day we are discussing the theme of MS, and this is obviously very relevant. I haven't yet gotten to it, and so we won't go on any sort of tangential points now. But for our purposes now, the pasuk in Yirmiyah tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the God of truth, and so when we are saying Ani Hashem Lekechem, we want to bring in MS as well to bring in this point that Hashem is the God of truth. Fine, says the Gemara. Do you go back to say emes v'yatzev again when you are now when the chazan is now finished Shema? Do you now go back and say emes v'yatzev emunah? Or do you just keep on going and say v'yatzev v'nocha v'kayim v'yashar? So the Gemara's question is, what do you do? Chayzev emes or ena chayzev emes? Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Right, the third time we have Rabbi Yochanan in the span of these few lines. So what does he say? You do go back and say again, emes v'yatzev. You do not go back and say emes again. So, what the Gemara is saying us is that fundamentally, Ani Hashem Lekechem, that will be the end of the parasha of Tzitzis. And we have a question: why do we not do that? Why do we not just stop there? Most people think Ani Hashem Lekechem Emes is actually what it says. If you look at the pasuk, of course, Emes is not there. Emes is part of Emes V'Yatzev, but Nachum Kam V'Yosha. It has nothing to do with the end of Vayomer. So why do we say Ani Hashem Lekechem Emes? The answer is because of the fact that Emes is connected to Ani Hashem Lekechem in a way. We have a pasuk in Yirmiyah. The pasuk in Yirmiyah tells us Hashem Elokim Emes, and we want to be mekayim that idea that Kadosh Baruch Hu is the God of truth. And we are not saying it here, but we do say that the Chesama Yishal Kadosh Baruch Hu is Emes, the signature, as it were, of the Rebbeinu Shalom is truth. So we wanted to put those two together, even though it really is the Bein HaPrakim, but we end up coming out like Rabbi Yehuda that we don't want to be mafsik between Vayomer and Emes, and that's why we say Ani Hashem Lekechem Emes. So we get that both are being Mekayim Zayin. So we're not being mafsik. And we now have the question of whether or not we have to go over it or not. As we said, Rabbi Yochanan says you do, Rabbi says you do not, and we have now a story. Says the Gemara, what's the Maisa? The Maisa is as follows: Who did not kame de Rabba? There was the person who was davening for the Amud in front of Rabba. Shamei Rabba the Amar emes trei zimni. So he said, Ani Hashem Lekechem Shetzeis Chamer Hashem Lekechem Ani Hashem Lekechem emes. And then he said MS v'atzev v'nacham can be usher. So he said MS twice. So Rabbah sarcastically responds, and he says, "I'm a Rabbah called MS tafse lahai," right? That the truth is really being pursuing this guy. He's mamish very into the truth. Okay, fine. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, Kama Malya Ha Rav Yosef says, how wonderful, how great is this Shmaitza, is this thing that we're learning? What is this thing that we're learning? The Chiasa Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Amar, when Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda came, when he came from where? When he came from Babel to Eretz Yisrael. Remember, we already had, I mentioned on Tesla Manal, if you remember the Gemara on Tesla Manal, we talked about Chiasa Rav Yisrael Bar Yosef, and I mentioned to you then that there are four people where it's most commonly associated they come from Babel. Right, we have Kiasa Rav Dimi, we have Kiasa Ravin, we have Kiasa Rav Yisrael Bar Yosef, and the least amount of times we have is Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, who we have over here. Kiasa Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, and it happens to be in this case, he's literally bringing a tradition from the west. Says the Gemara, the Chiasa Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Amar, when Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda came from the west, he came from Eretz Yisrael, Amri, he said the following, B'ma Rava, they teach in Eretz Yisrael the following, Arvis, during Ma'ariv, when they're saying Shema, they say like this, Daber el B'nai Yisrael, right? They say, V'yom Hashem el Moshe le'em Madaba B'nai Yisrael, v'amar ta'aleim, ani Hashem elikechem emes. That's what they say in the West. In Eretz Yisrael, they don't say a full Vayomer. They say they say that's the beginning part of Vayomer and the end part of Vayomer. They skip out the whole middle of Vayomer. So this Rabbi Yosef is saying is what a wonderful shemaitza, what a wonderful teaching that we're learning out from the West. That they say this sort of shortened Vayomer. What's the problem? Why is there a shortened Vayomer that we are being so proud of? What's the reason? It's because Vayomer contains the mitzvah of tzitzis. The mitzvah of tzitzis is thought to be only applicable by day, not by night. So by Ma'ariv, since you don't have the mitzvah of tzitzis to worry about, so therefore, why do you have to say the whole parsha of tzitzis? This again, this is the idea of Rabbi Yosef, why he likes this idea of what they did in the West. Amalei Abaya. So Abaya, the student of Rabbi Yosef, says to Rabbi Yosef, "My mal Yusah, why is this such a great idea by you?" V'Amar Rav Kahana Marav. We have another tradition. Rav Kahana said of the name of Rav, Lo Yaschil. A person doesn't have to say Vayomer at night. Why? Because the mitzvah tzitz doesn't apply at night. But v'im hischil gomer. But if he started saying Vayomer, then he's got to finish. He's got to finish. You can't just stay a part of it and then stop or skip. He's got to finish. V'chitem of amarta aleim. And if you want to say that the words v'amarta aleim, that's not really considered starting Vayomer, but that's not true. But we have a tradition from Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak who said in the name of Rav, Daber el b'nei Yisrael lo have haskala, v'amarta aleim have haskala. Now, if you just said Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemar Daber el b'nei Yisrael, that's not considered a haskala. What does that mean? It's not considered a haskala. That means to say that it's not really making a beginning in the sense that you could just say up to Daber b'nei Yisrael and then skip. You can move on. But once you say V'amarta Aleim, that is considered a haskala. And once you already have a haskala, then you have to finish. Amar Papa, Kasavi b'ma'arava V'amarta Aleim nami lehav haskala. They held in the West, they held in Eretz Yisrael, that saying Vayom Hashem al Moshe Leim Daber b'nei Yisrael V'amarta Aleim, that's not considered a haskala. So since that's not considered a haskala, they were able to say all the way until there and then skip until the end. Why? Because in Ma'arav and Eretz Yisrael, they held that you have to actually say V'asulam tzitzis. If you brought down tzitzis, then it would be considered a haskala, and then you would have to say the whole parasha of Shema. So says the Gemara, Amar Papa Kasavi b'Ma'arav v'Amarta Aleim Nami lehav haskala ad Amar V'asulam tzitzis. Until you said the words V'asulam tzitzis, then that would be considered haskala. Then you would have to finish the whole parasha of Vayomer. Because you're not saying that, because you're going to V'Amarta Aleim, then you're able to skip the rest of the parsha of Vayomer to get to the end. So Amar Abaya, so Abaya says, this is how we do it. Hilkach Anan Askule maskelinon, the kamaskil marava. We say Vayomer, Vayomer Shalom Moshe, Davav Nisrav Marta Aleim. Why do we do that? Because that's what the minig was in Marava. That's what the minig was in Eretz Yisrael. So we want to do like they did in the minig in Eretz Yisrael. So we say the beginning of Vayomer. But once we say Vayomer, we get to Marta Aleim. So we're chayshish for what Rosh Bar Yitzchak said, that he said that only Dabra B'nai Yisrael is not considered Aschal, but when you get to Marta Aleim, that's already considered Aschal. Then you have to finish Vayomer. So what we want to get ourselves into this like little conundrum. Right, we want to say Vayomer because that's the minig in the West to say it, but we also are machmir like our shita that we're chayshish that V'amar Talem means that you have to already start Vayomer, you have to finish it. So we get ourselves into this conundrum by wanting to be Mekayim everybody. We say Vayomer, the first bit, in order to be Mekayim, what the minig was in the West. Vayomer Shalom Shalem, Davav B'nai Yisrael, V'amar Talem, that's the minig in the West, so that's what we want to do. We're Mekayim Zayin, that wonderful. And then we get the second bit. What's the second bit? The second bit is that when Shmuel Bar Yitzchak said that once you say V'amar Talem, you have to finish. So once you have to finish, you have to do the whole mitzvah, you have to say the whole parsha of Vayomer. So we say the whole parsha of Tzitzis in the end. That you don't have to start, you don't have to say the parsha of Vayomer, but once you start, you got to finish because you already made a haskalah, and we are machmer for Shmuel Bar Yitzchak, who said the V'amar Talem is considered to be a haskalah. Fine. Maybe we just finish until the two dots, and then we'll stay over a couple of things. So let's finish the Gemara. Chia barav Amar. So this is Chia, the son of Rav. You remember we just had Chia barav. You remember where it was? We just had Chia barav. The Gemara told us on your Beis Amud Aleph. The Gemara on the bottom said that Shmuel wanted to say over a vort to Chia barav, and he called him Bar Arayan, right, which is a Ben Torah. That's what it literally means, because not in the sense of Ben Torah the way we use it, but we say it's literally the son of Torah because he's the son of Rav. So we bring it down now, Chia barav. So what does Chia barav say? Chia barav Omar, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, Tzorech Loimer Emes. Right? If a person is going to say Ani Hashem Elokeichem, does he have to say the word Emes? Lo Omar Ani Hashem Elokeichem, Ein Tzorech Loimer Emes. And if he doesn't say Ani Hashem Elokeichem, then he doesn't have to say the word Emes. But we have to mention we just had, if you remember, the Mishnah told us, the Mishnah told us the last Mishnah there in Brachot on Yud Beis and Beis. The Mishnah told us Bar Blazer ben Azariah that he learned out from this drasha ben Zoma l'mantisker asrim teischa me'eretz Mitzrayim. What did the pasuk say? L'mantisker asrim teischa me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha yamin kol yemei chayecha. Right, it was halelos. So, right, the Gemara, I don't understand. Your whole idea here of saying this, the way Rashi puts the question is, you're telling me that Vayomer is something that you could have gotten away with. Abai is coming along and he's like, okay, so we're going to Mekayim the mitzvah in the West, and once we say the Vayomer, because the West says we have to be machmer, like this Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak, who says that once you say V'amar Talem, you have to finish the whole parish. Like, slow down. What are you talking about? Don't we have to say Yitzias Mitzrayim at night? Don't you have to say Yitzias Mitzrayim at night? Right? It's a mitzvah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said from Enzima, L'mantiska Shem Teis L'meretz Mitzrayim means that you have to say Vayomer by night. You have to have Yitzias Mitzrayim by night also, not just by day. So why does this like be Machmer, the West, the East? Like, come on. There, sorry. Thank you. It had in there enough of being mentioning of Yitzias Mitzrayim that you were Mekayim Zayin that aspect. That's why we can investigate saying Vayomer Huav Vayomer without needing the whole aspect of Yitzias Mitzrayim. And since if I'm already being Mekayim Zayin, being Maski Yitzias Mitzrayim at night, so then what's Vayomer there? What's the other main aspect of Vayomer? Is Tzitzis. It's true, and I acknowledge that we already said, if you recall, we already said the Gemara told us on Yud Beis and Beis, we talked about the 6 things that it has in Tzitzis. The parsha of Tzitzis, it says in Mitzrayim, all mitzvahs, das, minim, hira, ver, and hira, ver, we had a whole bunch of things that Vayomer has. It's true. But the main aspects of Vayomer is the parsha of Tzitzis and Yitzias Mitzrayim. So if Yitzias Mitzrayim is already being solved because you have this little Maidim prayer that they said to take the place of Vayomer and Ve'emunah, so then the only other aspect of Vayomer is giving us is the parsha of Tzitzis. And Tzitzis doesn't apply at night. That's really how to look at this Gemara. In other words, the Gemara is asking, how is it that you can have this question, say Vayomer, not say Vayomer, have you holy Yitzias Mitzrayim? We solved it. We have this Maidim. So now you can understand how you can investigate this question of, do you say Vayomer? Can you say a short version of Vayomer? Because the only aspect of Vayomer that we were needing was the aspect of the Parsha of Tzitzis. Since Tzitzis doesn't apply at night, we can get out of it. What then is our problem? Our problem is, how much of Vayomer are you allowed to say before you reach a place where you're stuck in the net? The Vayomer net catches you, and you have to say the whole thing. In the West, they believe that you could say Vayomer all until V'amarta Aleim and you wouldn't get stuck. You could say Vayomer Hashem Moshe Leim Adaban Hashem V'amarta Aleim and then skip Bani Hashem Lekechem, and that's totally fine. In the East, there were those that said, no, once you say V'amarta Aleim, you have to finish. So we're chayshish for both. We want to say the aspect of Vayomer because that's part of the series of the Kriya Shema. But once we say V'amarta Aleim, which was their minig, we are chayshish for the Rishon Bar Yitzchak, and so therefore we have to say the whole parsha. So we end up, we say the whole Yitzias Mitzrayim, we say the whole Ve'emunah, we say the whole parsha is everything, right? Because of this shash. So we get nowhere. Ultimately, in terms of making Ma'ariv Shema any shorter, it's exactly the same length, and there's no changes for us. But this is sort of the undercurrent and the back and forth before we got to our current minig. Good? So far? Fantastic. Now, a couple of things we have to ask. Let's say the main one, okay? The main thing we have to ask is, what's going on here? Didn't we have a Gemara? We will all remember the Gemara. Again, back on Yud Beis. The Gemara said, Bikshu L'kbaya Parshas Balak v'Kriyas Shema. They wanted to include Parsha Balak and Kriyas Shema. Now, if anybody knows, Parsha Balak is a really long Parsha. There's basically no spaces until the whole issue of the Bnei Maya. There's no stops. The whole Parsha of Bilam literally is one Parsha. It's, no breaks. We just had that in Vayetze. If anybody ever looks in Vayetze, you see there's no breaks in Vayetze, right? Also Miketz. Those are the 2 parshas and Bereshis that have no breaks, no stops. So the Parsha Balak is a long Parsha. They wanted to put it in Kriya Shema. It's a very beautiful prayer. The Gemara wanted to know why. Why did they want it? So the Gemara said they wanted to have it because of Kara Shachav Ka'arich Lavi B'Yekimenu. It sounded like there's an aspect of Shema that it sounds like a Shachmachav Kumecha, like Kosh Baruch is watching us when we're sleeping, when we're getting up. Hashem is always around us. But the Gemara said, so great. So say it. So the Gemara said, you can't say it. Can you imagine if you added the whole Parsha of Balak until the Bnei Mayav? It's so long. It'll be Terchet Tzibur, so we can't say it. The Gemara said, okay. So splice out that pasuk. Cut it out. It's one pasuk. Just say that pasuk. And the Gemara said, no, we can't do that. Why? So the Gemara said a line that we don't paskin like halacha, but it's called parsha to paskin Moshe Rabbeinu paskinon, loy paskin Moshe Rabbeinu loy paskinon. If Moshe Rabbeinu made a parasha, made a space, then we'll say it. But if he didn't, we're not going to splice out a pasuk. We pointed out that that's actually not brought down in Shulchan Aruch. It's not brought down as a halacha, and we always are splicing out. Right? We say every morning, and that's in the parsha of Balak also. And we have no problem taking out that pasuk out of the whole parsha. No issues. Right? We say V'shamur on Shabbos. That's taking out a parsha. Parsha Kisisa, splicing out a pasuk out of a parsha. We have no problem doing that. So What was going on over here? Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemar. Daber el bnei Yisrael va'amarta aleim ani Hashem lekechem. You skipped out. You skipped out. And not only did you skip out, look at the pasuk in the parsha. You'll see pasuk v'amarta aleim. Vadaber Hashem vayomer Hashem Moshe lemar. Daber bnei Yisrael va'amarta aleim. What's the next words? Vaslan tzitzis al kan fevigdem. There are some. Vaslan tzitzis tchelis. It's the whole long pasuk. Not only are you splicing out from a parsha, but you're literally cutting out a pasuk. And we do bring down as a halachic matter that you may not do that to a pasuk. To a pasuk, you cannot cut it in half. A parsha maybe, but a pasuk you cannot. And what is the suggestion? And we're not practically going to do this because we end up being chayshish for every little shita. So we end up saying the whole vayomer, there's no problem. But in theory, in the Ma'arava, where they did that, aren't they having this problem of splicing up parshas, splicing up psukim? That's the question. This question is asked by the Rashba, the Ritva, and others. And I thought I would share with you because that's a couple of practical implications. So the Rashba has an answer. The Rashba's answer is as follows. The Rashba's answer is V'yeshlemer the Kemosh ein daber al bnei Yisrael v'amarta aleim haschala kivan shalei hischel be'ikar mitzvah hachanami ani Hashem lekechem lechashvin lebehefsik parsha kivan shalei omar me'ikar mitzvah klum. Says the Rashba, this is not really considered breaking up a parsha. You're not like cutting out the parsha in the middle. Why not? Because you didn't talk about the main thing of Vayomer. The main thing of Vayomer is the mitzvah of tzitzis. You didn't even say it yet. You stop at Vayomarta aleim, and then you jump to the end, and Hashem lekechem. Says the Rashba, that's really not, that's not cutting up a parsha. That's not only his answer for how you can splice up a parsha, but he continues and says, "V'afagav the karmel called psukad le'paskal Moshe Rabbeinu le'paskin." Even though you're not even allowed to cut up a pasuk, and little Vayomarta aleim is the middle of a pasuk, you're stopping. In the middle of a pasuk, you're cutting up a pasuk. He says, nevertheless, he says, I think you can answer the same answer as I just said, which is that essentially, since you're not talking about Yitzias Mitzrayim, since you haven't really gotten into it yet, it works. You haven't really talked about Yitzias Mitzrayim, you haven't talked about tzitz, you haven't just the beginning and the end here it's okay. That's the Rashba's answer. Because you didn't mention the major aspects of the parsha, which is the tzitzis, which is yes, you didn't say it, so therefore says the Rashba, you're okay. The Rashba leaves me a little cold, so I'll tell you what the Ritva says. The Ritva asks the same kasha, and the Ritva gives two answers. First answer the Ritva, I love the answer of the second one, but it's maybe too cute by half. But let's do the first answer, the Ritva first. Says the Ritva, first answer is, in the morning, you said a full Vayomer. What's the worry that we have if a person's going to splice up parshas? We're worried about heresy. We're worried about what are you doing? Maybe you have some bad things going on in your brain. You think you can cut out psukim, parshas. We're nervous about somebody like you. But if you already got up in the morning, you said the full Vayomer, okay. You already did a full Vayomer. You already show where your heart is. Now you want to go a little faster, whatever. It's fine. It's fine. That's the first answer of the Ritva. Second answer of the Ritva is a very cute by answer. Too cute by half. Says the Ritva, you remember the lane that we lane every Yom Kippur Mincha? Parsha Charimais. Pasuk tells us there, Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe lemar. Vaydaber al bnei Yisrael. V'omarta aleim, ani Hashem aleikeichem, k'maaseh yeretz mitzrayim asher yishavta bo yishaz v'kmat eretz Canaan, blah, blah, blah. So what do you have? What's that pasuk, says the Ritva? It says, okay, it's not Vayem Hashem al Moshe lemar, it's Vaydaber Hashem Hashem, but it's pretty close. Daber el bnei Yisrael v'omarta aleim, ani Hashem aleikeichem. It's literally a pasuk in Parsha Charimais. Says it, what's the problem? You're quoting a pasuk in Parsha Charimais. No. What's the problem? It's great. That would solve the problem of not cutting up a pasuk. It doesn't solve the problem of the parsha because you're still cutting up that parsha. Because the Kamasi Eretz Mitzrayim is part of that parsha. Fine. But as many have pointed out about this Ritva, it's a very cute answer. But is that really the pasuk that you're quoting when you're saying Vayomer? You're saying it's not a problem. The Vayomer that you're saying at night because you're really quoting the Vayomer from Macharimais. That's the part we're talking about parsha of tzitzis. That's why it's a little bit cute. Okay. Nevertheless. One other point to point out there is that this has very practical implications halacha that I didn't mention last time. This comes up, this topic in a lot of places. I thought I'll mention to you a tshuva chasam sofer. It's a very relevant tshuva for practical reasons. And everyone has their minhagim, and please don't take this tshuva chasam sofer as being any change in your life. For me, as an Eberland, it changes my life, but for everybody else here, I think you're basically fine. So Kiddush. Many people say by Kiddush, Yom HaShishi. Why do they say Yom HaShishi? Why do they want to say Yom HaShishi? They want to say Yom HaShishi because they want to say Yud Kei Vav Kei. Right? By Chul HaShamayim is Vav Hey. They say Yom HaShishi, by Chul HaShamayim is Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's very sweet. However, as Chassam Sofer points out, Yom HaShishi, what are you talking about? Like, look at the pasuk. Well, the pasuk has nothing to do with Yom HaShishi. There's no pasuk that says Yom HaShishi v'chol shemayim. People think literally that that's what it is. If you look in some benches, I think that maybe it makes it like a little smaller, right? The words to make it, you should know this is a difference. But many people think that Kiddush starts out Yom HaShishi v'chol shemayim. Like, no, it doesn't. Right? It should make your head split. Look in the Parshat and Brachot. Yom HaShishi is the end of a pasuk, and then v'chol. Guess what? It's a different parsha, not just a different pasuk. So. Says the Chassam Sofer, the suggestion is you say Vayer Vayiverker Yom HaShishi. You say quietly, whatever, fine, don't make people nervous. But Vayer Vayiverker Yom HaShishi Vaychulu now it makes sense. You want to do Vayem HaShishi, you want to get in Yud Kei Vav Kei, fine. So now we're going to bring in Vayer Vayiverker. Does that solve the problem? The problem still is that Vayer Vayiverker Yom HaShishi is the end of a pasuk. It's not the whole pasuk. If you look there carefully, you'll see that the pasuk says that Hashem saw that all that he had done was good. That's the second part of the pasuk. Says Chassam Sofer, it has an asnachta. Is the second part of the pasuk. After the semicolon is like new, and that's how you're able to get away with it. You don't have to say the entirety of the pasuk, and the lesson that he says is maybe somebody wants to be machmer and say the whole pasuk. Says I don't think you should say the whole pasuk. Why not? Well, you want to be mekayim? They want to say the whole pasuk. No, because the Chazal make a drasha type ma'od is Yom HaMaves. It has some negative connotations. So therefore, don't do it. So that's what we're letting you to break up the pasuk. You start out with Vayer Vayiverker, Yom HaShishi, and that is sufficient. That's Chassam Sofer. As many have pointed out, what about Shabbos day? I'm not asking for anybody to give me your personal minhag, but you may have seen. And many people start out Shabbos, say, okay, there's Shabbos, Havri, right? Very nice. It's a short Kiddush. If you have to say Toshev and Vishamru and Zachar, man, you'd be there for 10 minutes. But Al Kain is like literally where the last words in the Aseret Dibros on Zachar. I mean, how are you managing that? So, again, for those who have the custom, Iberland is need not apply, but it is, we don't need any more to want to make a longer Kiddush. I'm not saying you have to. All I'm saying is, we say the whole Zachar, not just Al Kain. Why? Because you don't want to have this problem of just saying the end of a pasuk, right? So you say the whole parsha, the whole Zachar Shem Shabbos that appears in the Sefer Dibros. You say the whole thing, and you finish off with Al Kain. And of course, we also say Vishamru. Vishamru happens to be it's a full pasuk that we're saying, but Vishamru is not a full parsha. It's actually skipping the middle of a parsha. But as I've said, the idea of breaking up a parsha is not a new thing. We do it literally all the time. I should mention that many places can point out that Nevi'im Ksuv is not an issue. It's only in the Torah where it's an issue. We do it even in the Torah. Look throughout davening, you'll see we do it. Nevertheless, we do have to explain it, and so by adding in at least the full Zachar to the Shabbos Kiddush will help explain why it's not a problem of cutting out a pasuk, which is in fact an issue. Okay, moving on. Here's the Gemara. So Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Karka, Lama Kadna Parashat Shema. This goes back to the Mishnah again on Yud Gimel. If you go back to the Mishnah told us that Rabbi Shimon Karfa, who may or may not have been the son of Rabbi Akiva, as we discussed, he wanted to know why is Shema before Vayim Shemaya, and why is Vayim Shemaya before Vayomer. So he said because Ol Malchus Shemaya before Ol Mitzvahs, and then you do Vahaya, which is by day and by night, whereas Vayomer is only by night. That was the basics of what Rabbi Yeshua ben Karach had taught us. So says the Gemara, Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, but didn't Sheyakim Shema Vayim Shemaya. Really, bedin, a person should say Shema before Vayim Shemaya. Shezel Lilma V'zel Lamed, because Shema is learning and Vahaya is teaching. Rashi explains what does it mean. One is Lilma and one is Lamed. Rashi says it says in Shema V'dibar Tabam. Rabbi Shinantam Levanecha V'dibar Tabam. Now we understand Vishnantam Levanecha to teach your kids V'dibar Tabam, and they and you should be learning in it. So we see that as Lilma. And by Vahaya it says Lamed. Why? Because it says over there, over there, that Ladaber is fundamentally on teaching your kids. So that's considered teaching. So in order to be able to teach, you first have to learn. So it makes sense as if Shema Echad to have Shema before Vayim Shema, because that's Lamed and one's Lamed. Vayim Shema Levayim. Why should Vayim Shema come before Vayomer? Shazeh. The word here is Lilma, but it's really Lalamed, because Vahaya is to teach. V'zelasais, and Vayomer has nothing in there about learning. It's all about doing. It's all about the mitzvahs of tzidus, etc. So therefore, since that's the most practical, that one comes last. Says the Gemara, Atu Shema Lilma is be Lalamed V'lasis lesbe. You're saying that Shema only has learning and it doesn't have Lalamed, it doesn't have teaching, it doesn't have doing? It has teaching in there. It has in there also about practical mitzvahs. So what do you mean? What do you mean that Rav Shimon Yochai is telling you Shema should come first because Shema has Lilmaid? No, Shema has Lilmaid, it has Lalamed, it has Lases. Says the Gemara of Asu. V'hayim Shemaya Lalamed hu de isbe v'lases lesbe. You're saying V'hayim Shemaya only has Lalamed to teach your kids. It doesn't have Lases. It has also the mitzvahs of putting on tefillin, etc. So what are you talking about? That one has only Lilmaid, one has Lalamed? No, says the Gemara. This is what you have to say. This is what Rabbi Shimon was trying to say. You know why? So Shema should come before Vayim Shema. She said Lilmaid, V'lamed, V'lases. Shema has three aspects: Lilmaid, Lilamed, and Lases. It has teaching and doing practical mitzvahs, not just learning. It has everything. Vayim Shema Vayim. Vayim Shema should come before Vayim. She said Yesh Bel Lilamed, V'lases. It has both teaching and doing practical mitzvahs. But Vayim ain't Bel Lases Bulvad. But Vayomer only has the practical mitzvahs, and that's why Vayomer comes last, right? That's Vayomer comes last. Taisus points out over here, says Taisus, the top Taisus on the page, Vayomer typically the Kadma B'Tairo. Taisus asks, well, why don't you say that the reason that Shema, we're asking a question, which one should come first? Why don't you say Shema comes before Vahaya? Because it's been Vazchanan, and Vahaya is in Ekev. So Taisus says, well, that's kind of it wouldn't be a great question because Vayomer is in Shalach. That's before everything. So V'yishlem says Lama Kadma Afla Parshas Tzitzis, the Kadma Kulon. So we have to ask it differently. We have to really ask, why is it that Shema, which is coming in Veschanan, is coming even before Tzitzis? It's coming even before Shalach. And we don't go in the order of the Chumash. The reason is, Taisus, as the Gemara explains, is because of the fact that it has all these various aspects in it. And Taisus continues, and Taisus says that we don't have to be chayshish for these issues about which comes earlier in the Torah or later in the Torah. This is fundamentally because ain mukdam u'mu'acher b'Torah. You remember the last time we discussed that was on Zion of Beis in the Taisus, the big Taisus on the page, only one Taisus on the page, when Taisus explained how ain mukdam u'mu'acher practically applied. You remember what it said? Taisus says the parsha of Lech Lecha, where Avram is 75 years old, actually takes place after the parsha of the Risman of Sarim, which takes place in the middle of the parsha when Avram is 70, according to the Taisus, which the Rashbam was learning, which takes place before the fight of the 4 kings and the 5 kings, which took place when Avram was 73 years old. And why did Taisus do that? Because the Gemara Shabbos on you that said that Sudan was for 52 years, and because the Gemara Brachot on Zion of Beis, where Avram called Hashem Adam first, the first person, and those 2 parashas where he calls him Adam twice, which one came before the other one? Okay. Not getting back into that now, but basically, fundamentally, Taisus is asking maybe the reason fundamentally of why you say Shema before Vayim Shema is because it comes first, And that wouldn't really work because it doesn't come before tzitzis. LMI, why can't you say it before tzitzis? Because we don't care about Eid we don't care about these kind of things. So we just have to ask substantively which one is the most important. Shema is the most important because it has Lumad, Lalamid, and Lases. V'hay is the second because it has Lalamid and Lases, and V'yom the last because it's just Lases. So it says the word. It's all very nice. We appreciate the Torah, very nice. But v'teblim Rabbi Shulman Karcha. But Rabbi Shulman Karcha already gave us the whole thing. But on Mal Shemaim before all mitzvahs, and then what's by day and night, and then what's by night. So we already had it. It says the Mar Chadavayd Kamar. We're saying Chadavayd. We have Rabbi Shulman Karcha, and now we have a new thing. Rabbi Shimon ben Yechai. Then we have so basically two different reasons: Shimon Karka's reason, and we have the reason of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Fantastic. Says the Gemara. We have a couple minutes. Let's just finish the last bit of the Gemara over here. Says the Gemara. I should point out. Tais wants to point. Second Tais that what that means, it seems from here that tzittis is really mitzvah of not grumman only applies by day. This could be a raya to that you say that the mitzvah of tzittis is not a mitzvah that applies all day, but only during the daytime. Says the Gemara, Rav Mashi Yod Kriyashma. Rav washed his hands, and then he said Kriyashma. If you recall, we had this Gemara back a few blot ago. We had it on Yod Aleph on Beis. The Amar Rav Chia Bar Ashi, right? Zimis Hagin Havi Kamin Kame Rav, right? He was there by what did Rav do? Rav Havimaktim Kamashi Yodu Baruch. Rav would wash his hands and he said Baruch Satar, and then he would teach. So we keep our hands there on Yod Aleph on Beis. We're going to have to jump back to that. So it says the Gemara, Rav Mashi Yodu V'Ker Kish Mavanach Tefillin. Rav would wash his hands. Here it doesn't say anything about Baruch Satar, but okay, we'll put that on the side. Then he would say Shema. Then he would put on tefillin, vitzal, and then he would daven Shemona Esrei. What's weird about this? Right? What's out of order here? The out of order is that he put on the tefillin after saying Kriya Shema. Right? Normally, right, we are saying Kriya Shema after we have the tefillin on. So what did he do? Says what was he doing, Rab? Somebody who is digging a grave. He is parted from Kriya Shema, he's parted from Tefillin, he's parted from Davish Ben Esra, and all the mitzvahs in the Torah. Tez points out here, the big Tez of Manach Tefillin Matzli, Tez points out, like, what's the reason that you would be, I'm sorry, not that Tez, the small Tez, second to bottom. When the Komas of Samush B'Torah says, why do you have to like specify Kriya Shema? If you raise something Komas of Samush B'Torah, why do you have to specify? It says because certain mitzvahs as Mangam, they have specific times that apply to them, and certain mitzvahs don't have that. So when you have a mitzvah that's specifically that's focused on the amount of time, so maybe those mitzvahs, if you say that you're pater from that, is you're pater from mitzvahs that have if you would say Komas Samush B'Torah, you would think you're only pater from mitzvahs that don't have a specific time associated with them. But mitzvahs that have a specific time, maybe you want to be pater from them. That's basis. Fine. So again, Rav, he's washing his hands and he's saying Kriya Shema, and then he's putting on tefillin. It's a weird thing. He should be saying first putting on the tefillin and then saying Kriya Shema. And we see that the person who's digging a grave, Talachas he's parted from Kriya Shema, he's parted from tefillin and Shemona Esrei, etc. But again, it's my Kriya Shema. Once Kriya Shema comes, then when the Zman of Kriya Shema comes, he gets up, he washes his hands, he puts on tefillin, and he says Kriya Shema and daven Shemona Esrei. So you see, he's putting on tefillin before he says Kriya Shema and davening. But it says more before we get there, Hagufa Kash, it sounds like it's a bit of a stira here. Why is that? In the beginning of this, you're telling me that he's pater from all the mitzvahs in the Torah, including Shema and tefillin, etc. And then you tell me he's chayiv in this. So the Gemara says, holy kasha. It's not a question. Sefer b'trev reisha b'chad. Well, you only have one person digging the grave. He's pater from everything. You have two people digging the grave. As Rashi explains, they take turns. When it comes to this Zman Kriya Shema, one guy does it, and then he comes back down, and the next guy goes up. Fine. Says the Gemara, welcome kash Rav. Nevertheless, it's still a question on Rav because you see that Rav is doing something that seems at odds with what we would normally do, which is you first put on the tefillin and then you say the Shema. So it says the more Rav Rabbi Shimon Karchas tefillah. Rav holds like Rabbi Shimon Karcha. The Omer on Malchus Shemaim tchila v'achar kach ol mitzvahs. Rav holds like Rabbi Shimon Karcha. The first thing the Ol Malchus Shemaim, then the Ol mitzvahs. What's the Ol Malchus Shemaim? Shema. What's the Ol mitzvahs? The tefillin. So that's why he's saying Shema first. Says the Gemara. What? Emor Dam Rabbi Shimon Karcha lahakim kriya lekriya. When it comes to Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, his whole vart of Malchus Shemayim before all mitzvahs, that's within Kriya, that's within reading the Shema. But would he say that with regards to doing mitzvahs? Come on, like that's not comparable. V'su misav like Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. Who says even holy Rabbi Shua ben Karcha? Rabbi Chiya bar Ashi zimna sagin avi kamini kamini Rav. Who said that Rav even held like Rabbi Shua ben Karcha? Because I have another testimony from Rabbi Chiya bar Ashi who said that I was in front of Rav umaktim umash yadim levarach. That Rav sometimes he would see that he would at times he was by Rav and he would see that he would get up and he would wash his hands umavarach and then he would say the Brachot Torah umasin lampirk and then he would teach us the whatever we were learning umarach tefillin and then he would put on tefillin v'adakar kriyashma and then he would say Shema. So you see that Rav at times he absolutely did not say kriyashma and then put on tefillin. That he absolutely put on tefillin and then said Shema. So v'chitem below the line zman kriyashma. Maybe you want to tell me that maybe there wasn't yet the zman of kriyashma. So therefore, since it wasn't the zman of kriyashma, that's why he had to first put on tefillin. But if he had already the zman of kriyashma, then he would have said the zman of kriyashma. Says the Gemara. 1 second. If it wasn't the zman of kriyashma, Maya said Rabbi Chiya bar Ashi, then what would be the point of the testimony of Rabbi Chiya bar Ashi? If it wasn't zman of kriyashma, then I'm not learning anything out of it. Says the Gemara, no, there is something to learn out of it. Lafuki man da'amar l'mishnah ein tzarach levarach. The teacher you Lafuki from the man da'amar who said before we had on the Yud Aleph from a base different opinions to whether or not you have to say Brachot Torah when you learn Mishnah Gemara. It happens to be it's interesting. Marzchias points out that over here we're saying that Rav was teaching them Mishnah. But over there, the Gemara says Rav was teaching them Talmud. Either way, whatever the point is, that yes, you could say that there is a value to this testimony of Rabbi Chiya bar Ashi because he's telling you essentially that Rav would be saying Birchas Torah when he was teaching Mishnah, teaching Talmud, and now you see that we're not holding like the Man Dhamma who says you don't have to say Birchas Torah. So fine. So Kamash Mun the Afla Mishnah Namit Tzarich Levarach. So you see that even my Mishnah you have to say Birchas Torah. So it says okay, whatever. Mikol Mokim Kashal Rav. Nevertheless, you still have a question on Rav. Rav clearly at times is saying Shema before putting on tefillin. Clearly here he is not. He is absolutely saying the Shema before he puts on. He's absolutely saying that doing the tefillin before he puts on before he says the Shema. Says the Gemara. Okay, Shlucha who the avis. The shliach took a long time. He didn't come. He came late. It's like learning from the story of Moshe about not kosher milk company because Moshe is like well, the milk was finished. So I use the other bottle. Different companies don't learn anything out of it, right? Okay, so you can't learn anything out of it. You know why Rav didn't wear the tefillin right away and said the Shema first? Because he didn't have the tefillin. If he had the tefillin, he would have done it. This here, when Marach tefillin, Sheshes learns out that if somebody didn't have tefillin, and he gets the tefillin let's say he said Shema, he could put on tefillin before Shemona Esrei. Says debate whether or not you should say the brachas of tefillin or not. Maybe you should say it afterwards. Mashmash and tefillin. But either way, when we end up in this Gemara is that we are saying that according to Rav, the halacha is, or the normative halacha is that we are saying Kriya Shema after we already have on the tefillin, and we'll just do one more line. Amar Ula Kal Kriya Shema B'Lei Tefillin Kilu Meid Eresh Sheker Ba'atzma. Anybody who says Kriya Shema without tefillin, it's like he's saying false testimony. He says Shaitim Loisayadecha Utavas Benenecha. You're not wearing it. Amar Chiya Bar Yechon Kil Hikar Vaylo and Mincha V'Zavat Lam Nesar. It's like you're bringing a carbon. You're missing the basics. You have to say Shema while you're wearing your tefillin in an ideal way. Have a wonderful day.